I set my suitcase down near the entrance of our penthouse, letting out a tired sigh. The flight back from Chicago had been brutal, but the thought of surprising Chloe kept me going. I looked at my watch. It was barely 8 in the evening. I was 3 days early. "Chloe?" I called out, walking into the living room. Silence answered me. The apartment felt colder than usual, almost abandoned. Soft ambient light reflected off the marble countertops, but the warmth that usually filled our home was missing. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. That was when I saw it, Chloe's work phone sitting unlocked right next to the sink. It buzzed once, lighting up the glass counter. I didn't mean to snoop, but the name on the screen caught my attention. Unknown number? Is he still out of town? The board update is ready for midnight. My brow furrowed. Board update? We didn't have any board meetings scheduled for this week. I picked up my own phone and opened the company portal to check our internal calendar. Access denied. I stared at the red text blinking back at me. I tried again, typing my password slowly. User credentials revoked. Please contact your system administrator. What the hell? I muttered under my breath. I founded Apex Marketing. Nobody revokes my credentials. Before I could call our tech department, the heavy oak front door clicked open. Chloe stepped inside, hanging her designer coat on the rack. She looked stunning as always, but her eyes held a sharpness I hadn't seen before. "Leo?" She stopped in her tracks, her voice dropping. "What are you doing here? You aren't supposed to be back until Friday." "I missed my wife," I said, stepping toward her. "I managed to close the deal early and took the first flight out." She didn't run into my arms. She didn't even smile. She just stood there, adjusting her watch with a practiced composure that chilled me to the bone. "You should have called," she said softly, walking past me toward the kitchen. "I would have prepared dinner. Or met you at the airport." "I wanted it to be a surprise," I said, following her. "Why is my company account locked out, Chloe?" She paused for a fraction of a second near the island counter before picking up her phone and slipping it into her pocket. "Oh, that." The IT department ran a system-wide security sweep this afternoon. Several executive accounts were temporarily frozen. "Temporary?" I asked, watching her face closely. "My entire access profile was completely revoked. That doesn't happen during a routine sweep." "Leo, please," she sighed, pouring herself a glass of wine. "You just got off a flight. You're exhausted and overthinking things. We can fix the tech glitches tomorrow morning." "It's not just a glitch," I said, my voice hardening. "Who is sending you messages about a midnight board update?" Chloe took a slow sip of her wine, her blue eyes fixing on mine. She didn't panic. She didn't stutter. That was the scariest part. "It was Julian," she said smoothly. "He needed me to review the client proposals for the quarter. We didn't want to bother you while you were pitching in Chicago." "Julian?" I repeated. "Since when do you and Julian schedule midnight updates behind my back?" "We aren't doing anything behind your back, Leo," she said, her voice dropping into a tone that felt almost patronizing. "We are running the company you built while you fly across the country. Someone has to keep the lights on." "I built Apex," I said quietly, the words tasting like iron in my mouth. "I spent 7 years putting every dollar and every hour into that firm. Don't speak to me like I'm an outsider." "Then stop acting like a paranoid husband," she replied, setting her glass down with a soft click. "You're stressed. Go take a shower. We'll talk in the morning." She turned her back on me and walked toward the master bedroom. "Chloe," I called out. She stopped at the doorway, looking back over her shoulder. Her smile was faint, distant, and completely devoid of warmth. It was the smile of a stranger who knew something I didn't. "Welcome home, Leo," she said quietly before closing the door between us. I stood alone in the quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the empty space. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pulled out my phone again and dialed Julian's private line. It rang 4 times before going straight to voicemail. "Hey Leo, leave a message," Julian's recorded voice boomed cheerfully. I hung up without leaving a word. Something was deeply wrong. The frozen accounts, the hidden texts, the cold distance in my wife's eyes, it wasn't a series of coincidences. It was a strategy. I looked back down at my phone screen, staring at the red access denied prompt. I had given Chloe my heart and I had given Julian my trust. I had brought both of them into my life and built my empire alongside them. But standing in my own home, surrounded by expensive furniture and empty promises, I realized the truth. I wasn't just losing my wife. Someone was actively stealing my life's work out from under me, and the woman I loved was helping them do it. I stepped off the elevator onto the top floor of Apex Marketing at 7 in the morning. The glass doors slid open, revealing the polished marble floor and sweeping views of the city skyline. I had bled for this company for 7 years. Today the air felt heavy, almost hostile. "Morning, Mr. Carter," Sarah, the front desk receptionist, said, looking up from her screen. Her eyes darted away nervously as soon as our gaze met. "Good morning, Sarah. Is Julian in yet?" I asked, stopping near her desk. He's in his office, sir. He came in early with Mrs. Carter." "I see. Thanks." I walked down the main hallway toward the executive suites. Employees usually greeted me with warm smiles and casual chatter, but today heads turned away as I passed. Whispers died down the moment I drew near. The atmosphere was charged with an uncomfortable silence. I pushed open the door to the main glass boardroom. Julian Reed sat at the head of the long table, sipping his espresso while looking over a thick stack of printed financial documents. He looked up, his expression freezing for a split second before a tight, artificial smile plastered across his face. "Leo," Julian called out, leaning back in his leather chair. "You're back early. Chloe mentioned you landed last night. How was the Chicago pitch?" "We closed the deal, Julian," I said, leaning against the edge of the conference table. 3-year exclusive contract. But I think you already know that. "Great news, man." "Fantastic," he said, waving a hand dismissively without looking me in the eye. "Look, we're reorganizing some internal workflows this morning. Routine operational stuff." "Routine?" I leaned in, keeping my voice low and controlled. "My administrative credentials were completely wiped last night, Julian. I couldn't log into our core servers from home." Julian took a slow sip of his coffee, setting the porcelain cup down with a light click. "All right. Chloe mentioned you were upset about that. Don't worry about it. IT is running a mandatory security migration for all top-level executive accounts. Standard protocol. Standard protocol doesn't lock out the founder and chief executive officer without notice," I replied sharply. "Who authorized the migration?" "The board," Julian said flatly. The word hung in the air like a blade. "The board?" I asked, forcing a cold laugh. "I own 51% of this company, Julian. You own 30 and Chloe holds 19. I am the board majority." No meeting was called. Julian stood up, buttoning his tailored jacket. He walked over to the glass wall overlooking the bullpen, keeping his back turned toward me. "Leo, you've been burning the candle at both ends. Chicago took a lot out of you. The rest of the leadership team just wants to lighten your operational load so you can focus on high-level acquisitions." "Lighten my load by locking me out of my own servers?" I stepped up right behind him. "Where are the quarterly performance files for our enterprise clients?" "They've been moved," Julian said smoothly, turning around. His eyes were cold, completely devoid of the warmth we had shared over 10 years of friendship. "Moved where?" "To a secure partition," he said, crossing his arms. "Under new risk management protocols. Only Chloe and I have administrative clearance during the transition period." "You're lying to me, Julian," I said, my blood running cold. "We built this firm together from a 2-room basement. I brought you in when you had nothing. Look me in the eye and tell me what is going on." Julian let out a loud, forced laugh that rang hollow against the glass walls. "Oh, come on, Leo. Don't be so dramatic. Nobody is stealing your precious empire. We are protecting the assets while we handle a sensitive corporate restructuration." "Restructuration?" I asked. "Or a coup?" "You're acting paranoid," Julian snapped, his relaxed demeanor dropping for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of sheer arrogance. "You come back early from a business trip, start throwing accusations around, and demand access to restricted operational files during an active audit. It doesn't look good, Leo. Honestly, it makes you look unstable." I stared at him, watching the man I had considered a brother for a decade standing in front of me like a cold-hearted stranger. "Where is Chloe?" "She's in a private consultation meeting down in legal," Julian said, checking his silver wristwatch. "And frankly, you shouldn't disturb her. We have a massive investor pitch coming up, and we need every detail locked down tight." "An investor pitch," I repeated quietly. "With Eleanor Thorne?" Julian didn't answer. He just adjusted his cuffs, offering another empty, patronizing smile. "Go home, Leo. Take the day off. Rest up. Let your team handle the heavy lifting for once." "This isn't your call to make, Julian," I said, my voice barely above a whisper but heavy with threat. "It is today," Julian replied quietly, leaning in close so only I could hear. Check the corporate registry update sent out this morning, partner. While you were busy signing contracts in Chicago, the board executed an emergency management clause. Interim control rests with the chief operating officers until the board review concludes. And last time I checked, that's Chloe and me. My fists clenched at my sides. Every instinct told me to shatter his jaw right then and there. But I forced my body to stand still. Raging like a lunatic would only give them the exact ammunition they needed to declare me unfit to lead. You think you've won? I said softly, looking straight into his eyes. I think you need a vacation, Leo, Julian said, brushing past my shoulder as he walked out of the boardroom. Have a good day. I stood alone in the quiet room, watching him walk toward Chloe's office down the hall. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs, but the fog of confusion in my mind completely vanished, replaced by an iceberg of pure, focused rage. They had planned this for months. Chloe provided the internal keys and Julian provided the legal maneuver. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought wrong. The neon sign of the 24-hour diner flickered outside, casting red shadows across our secluded corner booth. Rain hit the glass window while the faint smell of stale coffee filled the air. I kept my hood pulled low over my forehead, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped my mug. You're late, Maya, I said as a young woman slid into the booth opposite me. Maya Lynn, Apex's head of IT, quickly shook out her damp raincoat. Her face was pale, and she kept glancing over her shoulder toward the diner entrance. I had to be careful, Leo, Maya whispered, leaning across the laminated table. Julian placed a monitoring script on all internal network activity before he left the office today. If I had opened these files on my work computer, an alert would have gone straight to his phone. I knew I could trust you, I said softly, looking her in the eye. Is it really as bad as I think? It's worse, Maya admitted, pulling an encrypted flash drive from her pocket and plugging it into her personal laptop. When you told me your access was revoked, I dug into the audit logs. They didn't just lock you out. They wiped your digital authority profile using a high-level admin key. Who issued the key? I asked, my voice tight. Chloe, Maya replied flatly. She signed off on the authorization using her executive clearance yesterday afternoon. But that isn't all, Leo. I managed to pull local video storage from the off-site backup server before Julian purged it. What video? The private executive elevator, Maya said, turning the laptop screen toward me. The feed isn't routed through the main security hub. It records directly to an independent server in the basement. Neither Julian nor Chloe realized I set up a secondary mirror. She pressed play on a video file dated 2 nights ago, the night I was in my hotel room in Chicago reviewing financial reports. The video lit up the dim booth. The timestamp showed 11:42 p.m. The elevator doors slid shut on the top floor, leaving 2 figures inside the polished steel cabin. My breathing stopped completely. Chloe was standing close to Julian, her back pressed against the mirror wall. Julian leaned over her, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist. She wasn't pushing him away. She was laughing, her hands rested comfortably on his chest. Are you sure the lawyer verified the signatures? Chloe asked on the video recording, her voice crystal clear through Maya's laptop speakers. Positive, Julian replied, leaning down to kiss her cheek before pulling back with a cold smirk. Leo's digital signature was replicated across all 30 pages of the equity transfer agreement. As far as the board and the state registry are concerned, he voluntarily surrendered 25% of his shares to us while in Chicago. What if he fights it when he gets back? Chloe asked, winding her fingers through Julian's collar. He's smart, Julian. He'll know something is wrong the second he touches the server. Let him fight, Julian scoffed, running his thumb over her lip. By the time he figures out what happened, the board meeting with Eleanor Thorne will be over. He'll be completely broke, discredited, and legally removed from his own company. He won't have the money or the standing to sue us. You're ruthless, Chloe murmured, smiling up at him. I love it. I learned from the best, babe, Julian said, pulling her into a deep, long kiss just as the elevator doors dinged on the parking garage level. The video feed cut to black. A suffocating silence settled over our table. The diner noise faded into a dull, distant buzz. My throat burned as if I had swallowed glass, and my hands went completely numb on the tabletop. 7 years of marriage. 10 years of brotherhood. All shattered into dust on a tiny laptop screen in a dirty diner booth. Leo? Maya asked gently, her eyes filled with deep sympathy. Are you okay? Do you want me to close it? No, I choked out, my voice cracking under the crushing weight of the betrayal. Leave it open. I am so sorry, Leo, she said, reaching out to touch my arm briefly. I couldn't believe it when I watched it earlier. They forged your signature. It's outright fraud. You can call the police right now. No, I said, taking a slow, shaky breath. If I call the police now, their corporate lawyers will stall everything in court for years. They'll drain my remaining funds while keeping operational control of Apex. Then what are we going to do? Maya asked, leaning in closer. They're presenting the restructured ownership agreement to Eleanor Thorne at the annual gala in 3 days. Once Eleanor signs off on the corporate venture funding, the equity transfer becomes permanent. I closed my eyes for a long moment, letting the agony tear through my chest. I thought about every late night I spent building the company, every sacrifice I made to give Chloe a luxurious life, every time I covered for Julian's mistakes. They thought I was weak. They thought I was an easy target to be cast aside. When I opened my eyes, the tears were gone. The overwhelming grief in my heart turned into cold, razor-sharp focus. Maya, I said, my voice steady and deadly quiet. Can you save this raw footage to an unlinked, external drive? Already did, she said, tapping a second drive resting on her keyboard, along with the system access logs and the forged digital signature timestamps. Good, I said, taking the small drive and sliding it deep into my pocket. Do not let them know you found this. Act totally clueless at work tomorrow. What are you going to do, Leo? Maya asked, watching me closely. They set a trap for me, I replied, looking out the window into the rain. So I am going to let them think it worked. I am going to give them the precise performance they want to see until the night of the gala. And then, I whispered, I am going to destroy them. I sat across from Chloe at our dining table, watching her delicately spread butter onto a slice of toast. She looked radiant, completely unbothered by the web of lies she was spinning. You look tired, Leo, she said, pouring herself some orange juice. Did you sleep well? Not really, I said, offering a tired, helpless smile. I guess the stress of the Chicago trip caught up with me. You were right, Chloe. I'm burnt out. She paused, her eyes widening slightly in subtle surprise. You admit it? I do, I replied, taking a slow sip of coffee. I spoke with Julian yesterday. I realized I've been holding the reins too tightly. If you two need to restructure management to keep things running smoothly, I won't get in the way. A subtle smile touched her lips. I'm glad you're seeing reason, Leo. We only want what's best for the family and the company. Of course, I said softly, masking the bile rising in my throat. I trust you both. 2 hours later, I pulled my car into a secluded parking garage downtown. I adjusted my coat and walked into a private office space with no sign on the door. A tall man with sharp feature and graying hair stood up from behind a massive mahogany desk. Leo, Marcus Vance said, holding out a firm hand. It's good to see you, even under these absurd circumstances. Marcus was Chloe's older brother, a high-stakes corporate attorney known for his terrifying ruthlessness in court. He had severed ties with Chloe 3 years ago after seeing her ruthless greed firsthand. Thanks for meeting me, Marcus, I said, sitting across from him. I wouldn't have reached out if I had any other choice. When you told me over the phone that my sister was trying to steal your life's work, I wasn't even surprised, Marcus said, leaning back in his chair with a cold, disgusted sneer. Chloe has always believed she deserves everything without earning a single cent of it. Tell me what she and Julian did. I pulled out the encrypted flash drive Maya had given me and slid it across the smooth surface of his desk. In that drive, you'll find forged digital signature logs, modified equity transfer forms, and elevator security footage, I explained calmly. They forged my name to transfer 25% of my voting shares while I was closing our biggest deal in Chicago. Marcus plugged the drive into his laptop, his eyes darting across the files. A harsh scoff escaped his lips as he watched the elevator video. They actually discussed the forged signatures on camera? Marcus asked, shaking his head in disbelief. They aren't just greedy, Leo. They're dangerously arrogant. Can we stop them? I asked, leaning forward. Legally? Stop them? Marcus let out a dry, bitter laugh. Leo, with this footage and the IP server logs, we aren't just stopping them. We can destroy them completely. But timing is everything. They're planning to present the restructured ownership contract to Eleanor Thorne at the annual gala in 2 days, I said. If Eleanor signs off, the venture funding locks in the equity change. Then we let them walk straight into the trap, Marcus said, tapping his fingers against the desk. If you confront them now, their lawyers will stall, tie up your assets and file injunctions. But if we let them execute the fraudulent contract in front of Eleanor and the entire board, it becomes an active, undeniable federal crime, I finished his thought. Exactly, Marcus agreed, a cold glint in his eyes. Wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and grand larceny. They will be entirely ruined, legally and financially. I will personally file the criminal complaints and civil suits the second you give the word. What about Chloe? I asked quietly, looking down at my hands. She's your sister. Marcus looked at me directly, his expression stone cold. She made her choice when she betrayed the man who built her entire world. Blood doesn't excuse cruelty, Leo. I'll help you take back what's yours. Thank you, Marcus, I said, feeling a surge of strength return to my chest. Just keep playing the fool for 48 more hours, Marcus instructed, closing his laptop. Let them think they've broken your spirit. Let them feel completely invincible. It's the hardest acting job of my life, I admitted, standing up from my chair. Every time I look at her, I feel like vomiting. Channel that pain into patience, Marcus advised, walking me to the door. They think you're a defeated man, Leo. They have no idea they're walking onto a landmine. I drove back to the office with a newfound sense of clarity. When I stepped into the building, Julian passed me in the hallway, carrying a stack of files with a smug smile on his face. Everything all right, partner? Julian asked, his tone dropping into that fake, sympathetic register. Never better, Julian, I replied smoothly, looking him straight in the eyes without flinching. Just taking things easy like you suggested. Smart man, Julian chuckled, patting my shoulder before walking away. Leave the heavy lifting to us. I watched him walk into Chloe's office, closing the door behind him. I smiled to myself, feeling the sharp, icy edge of absolute control return to my hands. Let them celebrate. Let them drink their expensive champagne. 2 days from now, their little fantasy was going to burn to the ground. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the grand ballroom as hundreds of dressed-up investors, clients, and board members mingled over champagne. I stood near the back in my black tuxedo, holding an untouched glass of sparkling water. Across the room, Chloe wore a stunning emerald gown, laughing softly alongside Julian as they greeted our major shareholders. They looked like royalty taking a victory lap. They looked terribly pleased with themselves, a sharp, refined voice remarked beside me. I turned to see Eleanor Thorne, the legendary head of Thorne Capital and Apex's primary venture capital backer. Her dark eyes were piercing, filled with decades of high-stakes corporate wisdom. They think tonight marks their total triumph, Eleanor, I said quietly, offering a respectful nod. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me before the main address. When my lead founder tells me he has uncovered corporate fraud inside his own C-suite, I listen, Eleanor replied, her voice dropping to a low, icy murmur. You brought Marcus Vance into this? Marcus is holding the legal dossier in the lobby right now, I confirmed. And Maya Lin is connected directly to the venue's multimedia control booth. Eleanor took a small sip of her wine, her expression unwavering. Julian approached me an hour ago, claiming you were stepping down due to severe burnout and psychological strain. He asked me to sign the equity restructuring transfer on stage. And what did you tell him? I asked. I told him I would sign whatever was appropriate at the podium, Eleanor said, a dangerous glimmer in her eye. Let us make sure he receives exactly what he deserves. Suddenly the house lights dimmed slightly, and the chime rang through the speakers. Julian stepped up to the center stage podium, adjusting the microphone with a triumphant smile. Chloe took her seat in the front row, glowing with quiet satisfaction. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Julian's voice boomed through the hall. Welcome to the annual Apex Marketing Gala. Tonight we celebrate 7 years of unbelievable growth. But true leadership requires evolution. Today our founder Leo Carter has decided to step back from operational management to focus on personal health. A quiet murmur rippled through the audience. Julian raised his hands to calm the crowd, maintaining his smooth, fake smile. To ensure seamless continuity, Julian continued, our Chief Operating Officer, Chloe Vance, and I have restructured our equity framework. I would like to invite our lead investor, Eleanor Thorne, to the stage to officially sign off on this historic corporate transition. Applaud broke out across the room. Julian extended his hand toward Eleanor as she walked up the wooden stairs toward the stage. But I didn't stay in the back. I walked steadily down the center aisle, stepping directly onto the stage right behind her. Julian's smile faltered, his eyebrows nodding in confusion as I approached the second microphone. Leo? Julian whispered, keeping his microphone covered. What the hell are you doing? Get off the stage. I think the shareholders deserve the full truth before anyone signs anything, Julian, I said into my live microphone. My voice echoed loudly through the speakers, cutting through the applause. The room immediately fell dead silent. Chloe stood up from her seat in the front row, her face draining of all color. Leo is clearly unwell, ladies and gentlemen, Julian stammered into his mic, sweat breaking out across his forehead. Security, please assist Mr. Carter. Security will stay right where they are, Eleanor commanded sharply into Julian's microphone, her commanding tone freezing the guards in their tracks. Let him speak. Thank you, Eleanor, I said, looking out over the crowd of investors. 2 days ago, my signatures were forged on 30 legal documents to strip 51% of my equity while I was closing our biggest deal in Chicago. Gasps filled the ballroom. That's a lie. Chloe shouted from the front row, her polished composure completely shattering. He's making this up. He's mentally unstable. Am I, Chloe? I asked softly. I tapped my lapel microphone twice. Maya, run the presentation feed. The massive projector screens behind the stage flickered to life. Instead of the corporate slideshow, the unedited elevator security footage played in ultra-high definition. The audio echoed across the ballroom speakers with terrifying clarity. Julian's recorded voice rang out. Leo's digital signature was replicated across all 30 pages. As far as the board is concerned, he voluntarily surrendered 25% of his shares to us. The video showed Chloe laughing in Julian's arms, kissing him passionately right after discussing the forgery. Shockwaves hit the audience. Cameras began flashing repeatedly. Several board members stood up in outrage, pointing toward the stage. Julian turned ghost white, gasping for air as he backed away from the podium like a cornered animal. Chloe dropped into her chair, covering her face as soft sobs of terror escaped her throat. Marcus Vance stepped onto the stage from the side entrance, accompanied by 3 uniformed police officers and a team of federal auditors. He handed a thick stack of legal documents directly to Eleanor and the lead officer. Julian Reed and Chloe Vance, Marcus announced into the second microphone, his voice like thunder. You are being served with immediate civil injunctions for grand larceny, wire fraud and corporate conspiracy, alongside active police warrants for digital forgery. Leo, please. Chloe shrieked, running toward the edge of the stage, tears ruining her makeup. Leo, listen to me. He manipulated me. It was all Julian's idea. I love you. I walked over to the edge of the stage and looked down at my wife. The woman I had adored was gone, replaced by a desperate stranger reaping the bitter harvest of her own greed. You chose your path, Chloe, I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. Now you can live with the consequences. The police officer stepped forward, placing handcuffs around Julian's wrists while a second officer escorted Chloe toward the exit. The crowd watched in stunned silence as my former partner and my wife were led away in shame. I turned back to the microphone, looking at Eleanor and our shareholders. The weight on my shoulders was gone, replaced by absolute, unshakable freedom. Now, I said calmly, let us discuss the real future of Apex marketing. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, painting the glass desk in warm light. Outside, the city hummed with its endless energy, completely indifferent to the storm that had just swept through my life. 3 weeks had passed since the gala. 3 weeks since the world I built came crashing down around the people who tried to destroy me. A knock sounded at the door. Come in, I called out, setting my pen down. Marcus Vance walked into the room, carrying a leather briefcase under his arm. He looked tired, but his eyes carried the quiet satisfaction of a man who had completed a difficult job. Good morning, Leo, Marcus said, sliding into the leather chair opposite my desk. Morning, Marcus, I replied, leaning back. Give me the update. How bad is it for them? Marcus unzipped his briefcase and pulled out a stack of court papers. Julian's bail request was denied yesterday afternoon. The prosecutor added 4 counts of bank fraud to the forgery charges after federal auditors found secondary offshore accounts. He is looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison. And Julian's legal team? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Are they still trying to negotiate a settlement with Apex? There is nothing left for them to negotiate, Marcus said, shaking his head disdainfully. Eleanor Thorne and the board stripped his voting shares under the fraud clause. He is completely ruined, Leo. Every cent he stole has been frozen by the state. And Chloe? The name still left a metallic taste in my mouth, but the sharp pain in my chest was gone. Chloe surrendered her remaining shares to cover her personal legal fees, Marcus said, handing me a blue folder. She filed for emergency bankruptcy protection this morning. Her social circle has completely abandoned her, and no agency in the city will hire her. She tried calling my cell 5 times yesterday begging me to speak to you. Did you? I blocked her number, Marcus said flatly. She made her bed, Leo. These are the divorce papers. Once you sign them, the separation is absolute and final. I opened the blue folder. There at the bottom of the final page was Chloe's signature, written in trembling, erratic blue ink. Next to it was the blank line waiting for mine. I picked up my pen, feeling the smooth weight of the silver casing in my fingers. For months, I had thought my life was tied to her happiness. I had spent years worrying about protecting her, providing for her, and building a future together. She really thought I would just fold and break, didn't she? I murmured, looking at the line. She thought you were soft because you loved her, Marcus said softly. People like Chloe mistake kindness for weakness. They never see the storm coming until it's already ripped off the roof. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name in clean, decisive cursive. I closed the folder with a firm tap and slid it back across the desk to Marcus. It's done, I said. It's done, Marcus agreed, taking the folder and placing it back into his briefcase. He stood up and held out his hand. You did the right thing, Leo. Most men would have let their anger destroy them, but you kept your head. I had good help, I said, shaking his hand firmly. Thank you for everything, Marcus. Take care of yourself, Leo, he said, turning and walking out of the office. A minute later, another light knock sounded at the open door. Maya Lin peeked her head into the room, holding 2 paper coffee cups. Got a minute, boss? She asked with a small, cautious smile. For you? Always, Maya, I said, gesturing toward the chair. Come on in. She walked over and set a fresh cup of coffee on my desk before sitting down. The security systems are completely overhauled. Every admin credential has been reset, and the board just approved the new IT compliance protocols. That was fast work, I said, taking a sip of the coffee. You've done an incredible job keeping the infrastructure together during all this chaos. I just did my job, Leo, Maya said, her eyes warm. The entire office is behind you, you know. Everyone was terrified when Julian was running around changing permissions. People are just glad to have you back at the wheel. It feels good to be back, I admitted, looking around the spacious office. Though it feels a bit bigger than it used to. Empty space just means room to build something better, Maya replied, standing up. We have the Q3 strategy meeting at 11. Are you ready for it? I've never been more ready, I smiled. After Maya left, I stood up from my chair and walked over to the large window overlooking the city. I had lost the woman I loved. I had lost the man I considered my best friend. The betrayal had left scars that would take years to fully heal, and there were nights when the memories still burned like fire. But as I watched the morning light wash across the skyline, I didn't feel broken anymore. The fear, the doubt, and the suffocating betrayal were all behind me. Julian was going to prison. Chloe was left with nothing but her regrets and the empty luxury she had ruined her life to chase. Karma hadn't just caught up to them, it had flattened them. I unbuttoned my suit jacket, took a deep breath, and walked out of my office to join my team. My company was safe. My dignity was restored. And for the first time in a very long time, my future was entirely my own.